For hundreds of years, due to its position in the English Channel, the island of Jersey has always existed under the threat of invasion by the French. Today, happily, the invasion is a friendly one, and day after day, throughout the summer, thousands of French tourists pour into Jersey by sea and air, ready to board their coaches for an island tour and, favoured by the current rate of exchange, to make their purchases in the shops. They throng the streets of St. Helier, and everyone, particularly the shopkeepers, is pleased to see them. But there was a time when the French were not so welcome. And this well-known painting by Copley depicts the Battle of Jersey fought in the Royal Square in January 1781, when an invading French force was defeated by a combined force of English troops and the Jersey militia, led by Major Pearson. On this occasion, the French were successful in gaining a temporary foothold on Jersey by stealth, and indeed stealth had to be used, for a direct assault would almost certainly have been repulsed by the many castles, forts and towers which the British government caused to be erected around Jersey's coastline from medieval times until well into the 19th century. For hundreds of years, these sturdily built sentinels did their duty, their very presence posing a threat which no would-be invader could afford to ignore. But commencing with the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte at Waterloo in 1815, and the eventual realization by both England and France that continuation of the endless wars that had been waged between the two great nations was utterly futile, Jersey's ancient fortifications gradually fell into disuse. Many were converted into dwellings or put to other uses. The greater majority has survived to the present day, having become tourist attractions or landmarks in their own right, and all are highly cherished and maintained, being variously described as part of Jersey's proud heritage by historians or fairy tale castles made of rose-hued granite by eulogistic travel writers. But around Jersey's coastline can be found fortifications of another sort. Made of concrete rather than granite, they were erected during the Second World War, when the Channel Islands were the only pieces of British territory to be occupied by the armed forces of the German Reich, which, aided by the technology of modern warfare, accomplished in a matter of hours what the French had failed to achieve in centuries. During the 5 years of occupation, the Channel Islands were fortified out of all proportion to their strategic value, this task being initiated on the direct orders of Adolf Hitler himself. These concrete fortifications, however, do not meet with the general approbation accorded to their more venerable counterparts, and are described as being grim reminders of the World War II, concrete monstrosities, or scars on the landscape. Many people would be only too happy to see all the German fortifications demolished or buried. Why should this be? Is it because they are a reminder of war? If this is the case, then surely all Jersey's fortifications should be demolished. For make no mistake, no matter how attractive it looks in its surroundings and whether built of granite or stark concrete, a fortification is a fortification, and they were all built with one purpose in mind, to repel an invader. Why, for example, should this tower be described as a monstrosity? But this one, cherished as part of the island's heritage. In point of fact, each one has played its part in Jersey history. La Rocco Tower can be cited as another example. What would St. Juan's Bay be today without it? Yet with human nature being what it is it not likely that when La Rocco was being erected in 1796, it was described as a scar on the face of St. Juan's Bay? Is it not equally likely that by the year 1825, with the French wars already receding into history, someone was demanding the demolition of this grim reminder of Napoleon Bonaparte? And would not our forefathers have been highly amused had they known that one day a member of the established church would devote all his spare time into raising thousands of pounds to save the tower from devastation at the hands of the sea? Yet the Reverend Peter Manton was quite correct in his actions to save La Rocco, and we repeat, what would St. Juan's Bay be today without it? And what photographic competition would be complete without at least one view of sunset over St. Juan's Bay, with the tower as its central theme? And what of Montorgueil Castle? If ever a grim reminder of war existed, it is this ancient pile of granite. Described by tourist guidebooks as a fairy tale castle rising sheer out of the sea, the truth is that this so-called fairy tale castle has been the cause of more bloodshed and suffering throughout its long history than all the German fortifications in all the Channel Islands put together. It serves as a reminder of the Wars of the Roses, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the Civil War, and Napoleon Bonaparte, to mention a few, and, of course, it played its part in World War II, as can be seen by the addition of the German observation towers at the summit. Citing these examples, and in answer to those who would call for the demolition of every German bunker, the Channel Islands Occupation Society would argue that every fortification in Jersey, of whatever age, has played its part in the island's history and should be preserved according to its merits. This is not to say that every piece of concrete erected in World War II should be put under a glass case, but that the best examples of each type should be refurbished and preserved for posterity. The Jersey branch of the Occupation Society was founded in 1970, and while it has as its aim the recording and preservation of all aspects of the German occupation, it must be admitted that the investigation and examination of the fortifications loom large in its activities. In the course of these investigations, the more dedicated believe in taking off their coats and getting to the bottom of things. To the average member of the public, a German fortification is a piece of concrete that is passed while driving to work or exercising the dog, and in which little interest is taken. But it has been found that interest is quickly aroused when photographs of the fortifications are shown and compared with photographs of the same scene taken in the latter days of the Second World War, which is what we now propose to do. We will commence our tour of the island on Grouville Common, where this casemate for a 10.5 centimetre coastal defence gun broods above the beach. In 1944 it was fully manned and armed to the teeth. Note the camouflage in the form of painted imitation trellis work and creeper. Viewed from the beach, it can be seen that the casemate as a whole was disguised as a beach bungalow. Today, the paint has worn away and the gun has gone. Only the casemate remains as a reminder of the days when it formed part of Resistance Point, Fort Henry. At Gorey Pier, this bunker, also camouflaged as a bungalow, was erected to house a 7.5 centimetre anti-tank gun. The building was demolished in 1974 to make way for yet another car park. Anyone taking a stroll along Gorey Pier should take a closer look at number 14. Note the unusual downstairs window and first floor balcony. During the war, the window was a machine gun loophole, while on the balcony lurked a small anti-tank gun, waiting to deal with any intruder into the harbour area. On the summit of Montmallet, overlooking St. Catherine's Bay, stands the Victoria Tower, a 19th century construction on which the German Navy mounted a 2 centimetre anti-aircraft gun to protect a nearby radar installation. Today, although the occupants of the building still watch the heavens, their pursuit is of a peaceable nature, as the tower serves as an observatory for the instruments of the Victoria College Astronomical Group. Near St. Catherine's breakwater, another casemate for a 10.5 centimetre coastal defence gun lay hidden behind its camouflage netting, at the same time itself concealing an uncompleted tunnel complex. Now the tunnel serves a more useful purpose and acts as a vivier for the storage of live shellfish. On the top of the so-called Gibraltar Rock stood this 60 centimetre searchlight, watched over by its operator and a sentry. Now the searchlight is gone, the sentry has been changed, and all that remain are the operating platform and protecting brick wall. From St. Catherine's, we move right across to the opposite side of the island to Les Landes in the parish of St. Ouen, where the Germans erected a huge coastal artillery fire control tower, on top of which was placed a Freyr radar apparatus. Today the tower survives, basking in the sunshine and possibly recalling the days when it stood sentinel over the sea passages between Jersey and the other Channel Islands, although the radar fittings have long since succumbed to the depredations of time, weather and vandals. Not far away at Latac, the beach was liberally covered with Czechoslovakian tank obstacles, waiting to rip the bottoms out of approaching landing craft, whilst in the background can be seen a seaside bungalow, better known today as the Marina Restaurant. In the centre of St. Owen's Bay stands the Kempt Tower, built in 1843. From the earliest days of the occupation, the Germans utilised the building for defensive purposes. The main battle bunker here was yet another coastal gun casemate, suitably camouflaged. Look at the mass of concrete. It makes one realise what the Atlantic Wall was all about. A nearby concrete platform on which this searchlight stood now serves as the foundation for the only beach bungalow to have been erected in St. Owen's Bay since 1945. Standing a few hundred yards to the south of Kempt Tower, this bungalow was known as Heidi-Ho in pre-war days, and during the war it served as living quarters for the troops manning operational position St. Owen's Bay. Rather surprisingly, Heidi-Ho still exists, and if anyone is unable to recognize the building as seen here, they might know it better in its modern form. The brown roof in the center is the clue and marks the position of the older building. Around the coast of Jersey, the Germans installed a total of 23 Czechoslovakian anti-tank guns in fixed emplacements. This example stands at La Carrière Point, not far from La Filante. Today, apart from the removal of the gun itself and the camouflage netting, the scene is unchanged. In the foreground stands part of the island's heritage, while in the distance can be seen a Martello Tower, a grim reminder of war. The lighthouse at La Corbière must be one of Jersey's best-known landmarks, as this view appears annually in the many thousands of tourism calendars which are dispatched to all parts of the world each Christmas. The photographers, however, always go to great lengths never to include the nearby German searchlight bunker, which, in reality, is as much a part of the scene at La Corbière as the famous lighthouse itself. As this 1945 comparison shows, we tend to forget the extent to which these wartime constructions were camouflaged when they were first built. Also at La Corbière, the Germans erected another of their huge artillery fire control towers, in this case disguised to resemble a granite Martello tower. For many years after the war, the tower was virtually unaltered and remained in the condition seen here. And it was not until 1975 that work was put in hand to convert the building into a lookout and radio tower under the auspices of the state's Harbours and Airports Committee. And now the former observation tower has metamorphosed into this. St. Brilard's Bay is one of Jersey's centres of tourism, and a very pleasant spot it is too. But one wonders if tourists would have flocked to the bay in 1944 when it looked like this. The tank turret in the foreground formed part of Resistance Point Beau Rivage, and in the distance is the house which later became known as Tam's Pantry, and which is now incorporated into the Golden Sands Hotel. Moving to a point a few hundred yards to the east of St. Oben's Harbour, we come to the best-known tank turret in Jersey, by virtue of the fact that its photograph has appeared in practically every book that has been published about the occupation. Surrounded by its Belgian tetrahedral tank obstacles, the turret could be seen at La Hole, close to the main road and the meter gauge railway laid by the Germans. Near Beaumont, this coastal defence gun at Resistance Point 3rd Tower stood ready to deal out death and destruction. The casemate has now been converted into the Gunsight Cafe, which nowadays deals out teas and ice creams. Local defence at this point was assured by an MG-34 machine gun mounted in a Tobruk emplacement. One wonders if today's tourists ever give a thought to the warlike trappings with which the area once abounded. The 3rd tower itself was incorporated in the defensive system, and a heavy machine gun was mounted on the roof. The scene has altered little today, save for the addition of the public conveniences which were provided in recent years to the relief of many people. A heavily armoured, fixed, 6-loopholed machine gun turret was installed at Belroyal, one of 8 in the island. It was removed in the 1953 scrap metal drive, as these turrets proved to be of immense value to scrap metal merchants. Not far from the Belroyal slip there once stood a Martello tower, but owing to its affording a possible vantage point to an attacker from the land, the Germans decided to remove it. So, one day in January 1943, the tower was no more. The hamburger stall which occupies the site today can hardly claim the same aesthetic qualities of the older building that it has replaced. At West Park, and taking its name from the nearby hostelry of the same name, stood Resistance Point Grand Hotel. Note the unusual flat roof of the main battle bunker. The building has altered little today, save for the addition of the public toilets on the right-hand side, a task undertaken in 1975. We feel sure that the spirit of the late Dr. Fritz Tutt must be flattered to note how the architects of the Public Works Department have designed the toilets to blend in with the lines of the original bunker, built in 1942. Opposite the corner of Castle Street, and doubtless passed daily by hundreds of motorists who never notice its existence, this embrasure and ball mounting for a 4.7 centimetre Czechoslovakian anti-tank gun are fixed in the wall of the former JMT garage. Only the actual gun is missing today, and this 1944 comparison shows how little of the muzzle protruded beyond the mounting. Looking westwards from the same spot in 1945, it was possible to see the meter gauge railway of the Organisation Tutt still in position, and on which the last train had yet to run, an event that took place in February 1946. Today, not only has the railway gone, but the trackbed as well, removed in 1970 to make way for another lane of traffic. The 60 centimetre gauge railway to the east of the island ran in front of commercial buildings along the side of the road, but in view of the sinuous nature of the public thoroughfare at this spot, it was obliged to cross that part of St. Heliers Harbour known as the English Harbour by means of this substantial trestle bridge. Notice the central span, which could be raised to allow fishing boats to pass beneath. We now come to our last call on our tour of the island, the bunker at La Collette, which controlled the electrically detonated minefield which guarded the harbour entrance. For many years after the war, the bunker dominated the La Collette district, but now the building in its turn is dwarfed by the land reclamation project going on all around it, and is threatened with demolition. And so another fortification of the Second World War will have vanished forever. It is this constant whittling away at the German fortifications that concerns the Occupation Society. Hardly a year goes by without one building or another being buried or demolished, and the Society maintains that not everything should be destroyed. Something must be left for our descendants, and the mistakes of 1945 and 1946 must on no account be repeated. At that time, the British Liberation Forces, at the behest of the local inhabitants, who, understandably enough, were heartily sick of the occupation and everything to do with it, went about the task of clearing up Jersey with a zest and enthusiasm which gave little thought to future history and the fact that within less than 30 years, anything to do with the occupation would be highly prized and the subject of much interest. They could hardly be blamed, of course, for the urge to remove all traces of the German occupation reflected the mood of the day that prevailed in 1945. Such items that could be put to further use were sold by auction to the general public, as were vast piles of what was then regarded as scrap, which were accumulated all over the island. But what might have appeared to be scrap in 1945 might well be priceless to a collector today. Having discovered that the sea made a convenient dumping ground when they disposed of some 20,500 tons of ammunition in the herd deep off Alderney, the Army followed up by disposing of countless weapons in a like manner. Scores of field guns, hundreds of machine guns and mortars, and thousands of rifles were all tossed into the ocean. Apart from their value as scrap metal, which would have been realized within a few years, many of these items were irreplaceable and were thus lost forever. Then followed the tragedy of the big guns. Proving to be too cumbersome to be loaded onto landing craft, the Army looked around for an alternative method of getting rid of them, and someone came up with the idea of throwing them over the cliffs at Les Landes, and more than 25 pieces of heavy and medium artillery went over the edge into the surf, where they still lie to this day. Occasionally exposed when there is an exceptionally low tide, and ever and anon visited by weapons enthusiasts or scrap merchants who try to think of a way of recovering the gun barrels, but who always retire defeated, wringing their hands at this wanton waste. At the time, both press and public thought that the Army had done a grand job. Anything worthwhile that escaped the 1945 cleansing operation was pretty smartly removed in 1953 by Uphams of Guernsey, when they obtained permission to remove all surviving coastal defence guns and tank turrets in a massive scrap drive. The same must not happen to the surviving fortifications of the period. We repeat that not every piece of concrete needs to be put under a glass case, but that the best examples of each type shall be refurbished and preserved. To this end, it is pleasant to be able to record that as a result of representations made to a Progressive Public Works Committee in 1977, the following wartime installations have been placed in the care of the Occupation Society. The Artillery Battery Command Bunker at Nawaramo Point, which extends downwards on 2 floors beneath these observation cupolas. The nearby Artillery Fire Control and Observation Tower. This casemate for a 10.5 centimetre coastal defence gun at La Corbière. And another casemate for a 4.7 centimetre anti-tank gun at La Carrière Point in St. Juan's Bay. One type of fortification whose future is automatically secured are the mini concrete anti-tank walls which the Germans erected to protect the more accessible beaches against Allied landings, and which, since the war, have often saved the island's coastline from inundation at times of storm and high tide. As a result of the useful function that these walls now serve, they, together with the other constructions mentioned a moment ago, will be preserved for future generations to look at and wonder. For, while it is a view that is not popularly held at the moment, the German fortifications have all played their part in Jersey's continuing history, and will one day take their place alongside the granite towers and castles which have guarded the island for centuries. It is realized that as long as there remains alive more than one person who can recall the Second World War, there will always be someone who will detest the concrete constructions and all that they stood for. But, rest assured, when the last person who lived through the occupation has passed on, the German fortifications of Jersey will have truly passed into history. They will cease to be scars on the landscape and become respectable, and, who knows, one day a scene such as this may even be considered suitable for inclusion in a camera club competition.